I'm here with Miss Ann Nehrbauer at her home at 117 Hamilton Avenue in Hastings, and it's April 11th?
What is
12th?
10th?
We're somewhere there in early April
Yeah.
while we sit down to talk. And so we'll just start by asking you a little bit about maybe your earliest memories, or even before your earliest memories, where you were born, where you lived.
Okay, now I was born in North Yonkers on Bellevue Avenue, which is pretty close to the Hastings line. And my earliest remembrances of Hastings would have been, I guess, two things. My father was a policeman, and the beat that he had from the 4th Precinct in North Yonkers was walking from the 4th Precinct on Shonard Place to the Hastings line, and then up a little further, but not too much further. So we would hear my father when we were older, and he would be telling us how he walked to the Hastings line and how it was so much country then. And how much he actually, even though it might have been a very late night shift, how beautiful it was. And then the other remembrance is growing up in my childhood, we would always know when someplace in Hastings was having a fire, because where we lived was sort of back of Executive Boulevard, where that is now. And we would hear the fire whistle at Hastings blow, because there were volunteers then too. That's a long time ago. That would have been a good, 70 years ago or more. Mm-hmm. And we would hear that whistle blown. We'd all be saying, uh-oh, there's a fire in Hastings. And then we also would hear at 9 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, that whistle for Anaconda. When they let out on that shift, apparently we would hear that whistle. And then there was a curfew whistle that blew sometime around 9 o'clock that we used to hear. Occasionally we would hear that. So those are early things about Hastings. Something else, my father used to tell us stories when he was young. Now, he was born in 1889, so that would have brought him into the early 1900s, of coming up to Hastings when he was a very young man to watch the boxing matches that were held up here. And from what I can gather, it sounded like it was, he used to talk at Washington Avenue, so it would have been the Draper.
Oh, so it was held outdoors?
Property outdoors. It was big open space. And they would have the boxing ring set up, and all the people would be coming all around it. And how they got here was on the trolley car that came all the way up Warburton Avenue.
So there were tracks.
Into Hastings, and
was
there
it
were
also
tracks.
a driving, also a road, or just a trolley?
No, there was a road there, and there was a rough road kind of then, but and the tracks and the trolleys would come up. Eventually, and that was apparently pretty well known.
So that was a weekend activity? And
it was an activity that would be on the weekend that they would come to and look forward to coming. My father was a boxing enthusiast, even from the time he was young. Interesting, such fierce fighting, and he was a very gentle man. So those are early reminiscences.
And your house was where, the house you grew up in?
The house I grew up in was in North Yonkers on Bellevue Avenue, which at that point was a dead-end street with nothing in back of it but woods. And even further than the Untermeyer estate on the other side, which was all country and woods.
And I'm not familiar with that area, so how far south from here would that be?
Below St. John's Hospital.
Oh, okay.
Well, let's see. It would be right below St. John's Hospital on the east side of Broadway, running easterly and a little bit more south. And
so your dad, on his beat, he was able to walk?
Yes. And from Shonard was even further south, so they walked that beat back and forth, checking on the very wealthy estates that were at that time all along Broadway.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yes, everything was just huge estates. Some of the walls of those estates, a few of them, are still left along Broadway going down into Yonkers. Not a lot of them. And certainly the whole growth that happened over all these years makes a big difference. Big difference. So, and that property, even when you come up to Hastings, the floral beauty of it in the springtime, there were rhododendrons all along. And when you come up near the Boyce Thompson property, which runs right kind of into Hastings almost, they had those greenhouses, and they would have outdoors. There would be some things growing too, so you always looked for that. And as you come up toward Hastings, when I first lived here in 1952, 49, 52, yeah, we moved here. The cows that were from the Andrus home, they had cows, and they had, I don't remember sheep then, but they had cows, and the cows were still grazing all along on their property.
Now, how is it that they had cows?
They had a regular farm, and they had apple orchards.
As part of the program?
It was maybe a bit of self-sufficiency, because they did have orphan children that were living there.
Sure.
And I think it was the country. It was very country-like. And also, when we come up, all of the property on Broadway, after you pass Tompkins Avenue and you're coming north a little more, that was all vacant property. All vacant.
And that development that's there.
And then so in those early years, going north and on the east side, that was all totally developed with those houses. That's about how old they would be, from the 50s and into the 60s. They built that all up. So that was more land that we saw disappear with housing. So,
and did you go to school in the Yonkers School District?
I went to school at Sacred Heart High School from the kindergarten all the way through high school. And it was like a private school practically in the high school part, because the classes each were very small, 50, 52 children in a class. And the grade school, was much more crowded. The grade school, which we had to walk to, and as a child, it was a long walk, up hills and down hills. How far would you
say, about how long did it take?
Well, as a child, you're thinking it took forever, but I suppose it would take us 45 minutes, because we didn't exactly walk directly. We lagged a lot along the way. And we could shortcut through open fields and properties down sort of into the valley area and back up the other side, because we lived up on the hill. But that's all developed into homes now. There's no shortcuts anymore. You would have to do Park Avenue all the way to Roberts and then up onto Bellevue. So I was always sort of in this area of Westchester.
And was at the time you were a child, this would be during the Depression?
It was.
Is that right? So do you have memories of that, or how it impacted?
Oh, yes. Do I have memories? The Depression... I was born in 1928. From 1933, 34, 35, when all those horrors were going on in Europe, which we would hear about kind of vaguely. We just had a radio and not a lot of other media or communication, but my father, you'd hear them talking. They were very concerned, but my father built the house that I was born in, and I loved that house. My sad memory is in 1940, 41, it started in 39, where there was no work at all. My father, at that point, had been retired from the police department, and he was a bricklayer by trade too. So he would do bricklaying or any work he could get, but there was no work to be gotten. So therefore, the mortgage payments lagged. And I remember clearly the man who held the mortgage, it was called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, coming to the front door and telling us that we could no longer stay, that we were evicted because we could not pay. And then we had to start looking at apartments because there was no reserve money or anything, and we had to have a place to live. And at that point, in 1940, 41, we left the house. It was very sad. And we moved down to what was called Lake Avenue, which was still at that time a very lovely area. It was near the parish church, it was near the school, near the high school. So all things looking back at it, I suppose it was a wise move at that point. But we had a piano when we lived in our house, and my father had all kinds of tools and had to leave so much of it behind because there was no place to keep it. And I still have the one bag of things that he took with him of his tools for his bricklaying and stonework. And my children use those sometimes. So, I mean, during that Depression, there was just nothing. But everybody was in the same boat, kind of. Mm-hmm. And when we went to school, we got 2 dresses and 1 pair of shoes. And we got the shoes at Hannigan's on Warburton Avenue in Yonkers. Still can see where you went in and they measured you and talked to you. 1 pair of shoes. And when the soles wore out on those shoes, there was no money for shoemakers. All of us took pride on finding the best kind of cardboard, putting your shoe on and making a pattern, and being sure that every morning you had new cardboard in your shoe, because by the time you got home after walking this distance to school, the holes were back in your shoes again. But that was part of your job that evening. And it was funny, as we walked along, if you saw somebody putting something out and the cardboard looked good, we'd say, "You think we should take it? Good for your shoes." That didn't make us unhappy, and we kind of looked at it as a challenge that we'd get over this. There's a lot of people around that have it much, much worse, that don't even have any food on their table. And the people in Europe are suffering so bad, being persecuted and all, that my mother gave us that message that, we have to be grateful for every little thing we have, and we have each other. And that was it.
Would you like to say a little something about your mother? We haven't really talked about
Well, my mother was born in Ireland and came here as a 19-year-old, and she came here in 1909, and she worked first, and she was sponsored by an aunt who was here already, had to have a job, and she worked in the Silver Lining Laundry in Brooklyn for a number of months until she heard that there was a nice job in the country place above in Yonkers, and there were some other Irish girls that worked there too, and so she therefore made it her business to find a way to come up and inquire about a job, and got the job as a chambermaid and as a laundress, and she worked on the Untermeyer estate in Yonkers and lived there for, I would say, it must have been 10 years, about 10 years or more, and that's where she met my father, when he was walking his beat.
I think that's something.
When they used to stop in for a cup of coffee, because all the servants lived, the footmen and the chambermaids and the laundress, they all lived in a stone structure that was north of the mansion. So we knew lots about Untermeyer's mansion. Yeah. And I have pictures of the grounds that I've given to the Yonkers Historical Society from the original estate when it was there, for which they were most appreciative. Yeah. So that's kind of what my mother was, yeah. Great lady. I lived to be 95. So it kind of proved if you got good genes, hard work never killed you, because she worked hard. Yeah.
Sounds like
it. But they enjoyed life there because Sam Untermeyer wasn't there a lot. He was gone off to Europe and bringing different statuary back and different trees back for the estate. So that all of the people who worked there were Italians, Germans, Norwegians, Irish. That was the main group that worked at those jobs then. Yeah. So, and she kept in touch most of her life with 1 or 2 of them. And then eventually they died off and we heard no more. But coming from Ireland, she didn't really know the the foods that were cooked here and the vegetables and everything that was grown, eating was very different.
You can imagine.
And she worked also with the cook. She called herself the second cook, which was kind of preparation, and she learned all about the American diet working at Untermeyer's, so that when we came along, we never had white bread in our house. Whole wheat bread. Fresh vegetables delivered by the vegetable man twice a week. Came with his truck. Fresh vegetables and whole wheat bread, and we would always beg her, couldn't we please get white bread, Mama? Couldn't we please? No, that whole wheat bread is the good bread for you. And of course she made Irish bread all the time too. So we never went hungry, thank God.
So you had that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we move along through your childhood, I think that could be another fascinating conversation.
Oh, you'd be here all day. Yeah.
As you finished high school, was there any thought to continue your education in any way? Or?
No, there really wasn't, because even still then, when I was done, the war was on, and gradually some of the men were, they were starting to come back, and they were coming back to jobs that they had, although there were jobs around.
What year would you have graduated high school?
I graduated in 1946.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so when I graduated, I had taken what was called a commercial course. There were no languages, but there was bookkeeping, business law, shorthand, typing, English, of course, spelling, history, American history. I did a big course in American history, which I loved. So we took all of those, and I graduated with this commercial course. Before I ever graduated, in order to get some little money, I worked from my junior year and my senior year, when I had a day off or in the summers, down in the city. I would commute down, and I got a job doing clerical work. That's all. At the Hotel Commodore, I worked quite a long while on Saturdays, and put that money aside. And when I think of it, we were getting money, and we would get a Christmas club. And at the end of the year, you got $25. That was a lot of money in our pocket.
Absolutely.
And banks honored it. They'd cough at you now if you said, $25 at the end of the year. Forget it. It's not worth it. But it created a great saving habit, and we all learned to save. Save everything. Save your money, save your good clothes, save. And the culture today says to me, what's being preached is spend. And I think that's what's made somewhat the difference in the world today. Not that it's horrible or bad, it's the way the world has gone. And who knows, it may turn around again. You never know. So when I graduated, I went to work then full time. But I met my husband, George. My brother married another Hastings name, Greenland, married a girl by the name of Greenland. And when her sister was getting married, my mother and father were invited to the wedding. Her sister was marrying Ann Nehrbauer. My father had something on. He could not go to the wedding. And my mother wanted me to go. I didn't really want to go because I had my plans with my friends for Saturday afternoon. But she sort of said, well, I can get you a new dress for the wedding. I said, oh boy, that did it. She can't be in. So I got this dress and I went to the wedding. And that is where I met George Nehrbauer, my future husband.
So this was at his brother's wedding?
So it was at his brother's wedding, yes. So it was a good thing that my mother conned me into it. Anyway, that's where I met him. And we were married then in...
But let me back up if you don't mind. Were you immediately taken with each other?
Absolutely.
It was one of those days.
From the get-go. Because I remember a couple of weeks later getting on the train when I was going to work, saying to my cousin, there was 3 or 4 of us would meet on the train, coming and going to work. We all worked downtown, saying, well, you know what? I met the guy I think I'm going to marry. And we were having this big discussion and talk about who this guy was, and I remember saying, the only thing that didn't impress me was that suit that he wore had a belt in the back. And I really didn't like that jacket. I said, but of course that's only a jacket, that's not him. So, and we went together, then I got married 2 years later.
2 years later.
3 years later, yeah, saved some money along the way. And
made your plans.
Made some plans. And when we got married, we had a big reception in his backyard. Well, I was now living in that apartment still that we had moved to. So there wasn't money to get a big hall, and it wasn't done that much then anyway. So backyards were really nice, and you prayed for a good day. So we got married at a 10 o'clock mass and had a wedding breakfast at my house. And then in the afternoon, we had an outdoor wedding reception at his house in Hastings,
which was
50 Lincoln Avenue, the house of which is no longer there, having been knocked down and a big box house put up in its place.
So he grew up in Hastings then?
He grew up. He came to Hastings when he was very young. He must have been only a few years old, a couple of years. In fact, I think he was only about 2.5. And they rented, there's a 3-family house on Lincoln Avenue, the high end of Lincoln Avenue, where his mother, who had tuberculosis, and his father, his 2 older brothers, and George lived. And the grandmother, because the mother had TB, the grandmother used to come and visit and help out. That would have been his father's mother. Mm-hmm. And she used to help out. And when she came one time, she noticed that further up the hill there was a house being built. And she had a few dollars. And because the apartment they were living in was rather crowded, she arranged to buy the house that was being built further up the hill. And so by the time, although the mother died before they ever moved into it, and George was only over 3 then.
At that time. So did they move to Hastings from the city?
They moved from Astoria, which was quite citified, and they lived right by the tracks. The Amtrak goes practically over now.
So this was considered to be coming to the
They were coming to the country and the fresh air that was going to cure you of TB. That was why they came. And that was in about 1923, 1922, because he was born in 22, so it was right around those years they came up. And then the mother died, and then the father had the grandmother for a while. The grandmother aged out; she couldn't really care for them.
Were there siblings? Did you have siblings?
And,
you mentioned
yeah, the 2 older brothers, Henry and Nicholas. Henry was 10 years older than George, and Nicholas was 12 years older than him. So they were really big brothers, and the father was a plumber, and did plumbing jobs when he could get them, or any kind of work when he could get them. And then the hard years came in the 30s during the Depression, and at that point the 2 boys were out working and kind of chipping in to keep the mortgage paid, and the father was too, but it took the 3 of them to hold on to the house. Mm-hmm. And they did manage to hold it on with the grandmother's help, who she had put some money into it for them too. So they had a roof over their head. They had a good roof over their head, and they lived there and grew up there.
And then did George's father stay in that house for the rest of
George's father, until the last couple of years when he had dementia and was failing, he was in a nursing home. Wasn't even hardly 2 years.
And then, so the house stayed in the family?
It stayed in the family. Nick lived there. And after the war, when Henry got married, Henry was married, they lived there.
So
and George was there, and the father was there, and Nick and Sarah, they had, well, Henry had moved out then, but
Sarah's Nick's wife?
Sarah was Nick's wife, and they had, at the time, 2 young children, Nancy and Nicky. So then George moved out when he married me. So then they had the house, and they had 2 more children. So they were there with 4 children in that particular little bungalow house, which was a wonderful home. Yeah, it was great. And that's where we had in their backyard. That's where we had our big wedding.
And it sounds as though the weather was good after all.
We only had 2 kids got stung with bees, and our entertainment was the car radio down in the backyard with the baseball game on, and chatter, and people visiting each other that hadn't seen, and some music from a radio. And every bit of food was prepared. Well, Sarah did some, but my mother and my aunts cooked all of the food. And there was a spread that was tremendous with huge turkeys that had been cooked, roast beefs that had been cooked, potato salad, all kinds of salad, everything. And kegs of beer. And there was liquor if somebody wanted to drink, but the kegs of beer were very popular, and they drew a lot of bees too.
Yeah, that's the reason for this.
Yeah, so that was the party.
And then the brother Henry, did he stay in Hastings as well?
Yes, Henry was able to. Down by the playground below Reynolds Field, that playground, there was the Grandies owned a house. And it's that one right around when you go around the bend by the playground. There's a house there, and Carmen Grandy lived there, and they were all Hastings people. And that's where Henry and Dolores got an apartment. When we got married, we moved. We couldn't find we lived with my parents a while, and then George's aunt out in Bayside had a 2-family house, and so that we got an apartment in that 2-family house. And we lived there for a few years, almost 3 years, I guess. And we always wanted to get back to Hastings. So we had Stanley Rosenkamp, another full-time Hastings person, was living in what was called, they had gotten married at St. Matthew's to Rosemary Croak. There's another Hastings, long name. And they couldn't find an apartment other than the cold water flat at the Spite House, which is on the Aqueduct at 37 Villard Avenue. So one of the families there had moved out, and Stanley called us. Stanley was minding it, collecting the rent for the landlord, who lived elsewhere. And Stanley calls us and tells us, somebody moved out, you want the apartment, it's on the first floor. So, of course, we said absolutely. And we took the apartment, which had a coal stove in the front, in the kitchen. No hot water until we got there, but then Grandpa fixed a jacket on a hot water tank and fixed us up.
So cold water flat literally means what?
No heat. You create your own heat. And the coal stove, we had a coal stove in the front, and they're railroad rooms. You just run straight through them. There's a hallway, and each room is to the left of the little hallway. So there was the kitchen, and another little room, and another little room. The living room was a little room. Then next there was a little tiny bedroom, and next there was a little bigger bedroom in the front, facing Villard Avenue.
Is that building still there?
Oh yeah, 6 families. It's there. It's steam heated, renovated so that it has a full bathroom now. When we were there, we had a toilet. It was off the kitchen, a toilet, and no sink, just a toilet. And in the kitchen there was a sink, and the old black agate tub was there. And then around that, on the other wall, we had the coal stove, and we had a table by the kitchen window that looked out on the aqueduct. And then there was a doorway. To the right of the doorway was the refrigerator, and when you went in the bathroom, you had to go sideways to pass the refrigerator to get into the toilet. My father-in-law, being a plumber again, created a shower base right in front of the toilet with a barred, a base that had sides on it, so that when you went into the bathroom, you had to be careful not to trip on the shower base, because you'd fall in the toilet if you did. But we had an overhead shower, and we had hot water from that hot water tank from the coal stove.
Were you the envy of your neighbors?
Which we ran. Absolutely. Well, Stanley Rosenkamp, he rigged something up. He had hot water. But we were the only ones in the whole place that had hot water. Everybody else had to heat their water on the stove. So, and there was a family with 6 children, another family in Hastings that lived there a long time, longer than us. Bukovich was their name. and there was Mrs. Minnis was another lady that lived there, and I'm trying to think of the name of the painter. A German man lived there, and there was an Italian family that lived, and I can't think of their name, on the other side of 6 families. But we had the most wonderful backyard there. Everyone had a garden. The property ran very much in the back, a long way along the aqueduct. So, and the people that lived up in the big house at that point, I think their name was Barnes. A beautiful big house that was, it would have been like north. The backyard ran north of the property. Everybody had a big garden. We raised our vegetables. And alongside where there's now this driveway, it wasn't there then, there was a huge 4 or 5 oil storage tanks. A man by the name of Party, who was from Hastings, used to deliver oil. We had an oil stove in our bedroom. It was a scary thing, but it heated the place very well. And as the lady upstairs used to say, "Oh, my floors are so nice and warm from your heaters." So it was. I did have pneumonia while I was there from I don't know what, but we had Ann. We brought Ann. Chris was there. Therese was born when we lived there. And yeah, Ann, Chris, we had 3 children. The first 3 children were in the house raised. And they had the most wonderful outdoors. They had a big open back porch, a great big clothesline. Everybody had clotheslines. Mm-hmm. And Stanley built a wonderful swing in the backyard off one of the big trees, a tire swing. It was wonderful for us too. It was great. It was and you could walk to the village. To go to church, you could walk to the village to do your shopping, which I did do at the small A&P on Warburton Avenue, where Lenny was there for a long time. Lenny the butcher and Johnny Masello had a store later years where he sold vegetables.
Do you remember about when that would have been?
Let's see. That had to be in the 70s, I think.
And where was the A&P?
Now, that part of that, where Lenny the butcher and Johnny Masello had the vegetables, that's where the A&P had been. I'm trying to think of the name of the guy that Al somebody had a store there.
And what would before be there that?
Now there's the takeout and the vegetable. He sells vegetables. They're Asian people run it, I think.
Prime Meats.
Well, it had been Prime Meats, but I don't know what they call that store. That's the location.
Yeah.
That's the stretch. Mm-hmm. And that was the A&P. That was when you went in and you stood at the counter and you had your list and you told them what you wanted and they did all the work.
Oh, is that right?
That's how it was. When I was a child growing up, that's what we went to the A&P on our block. And you went down, when I was on Lake Avenue, you went down with your list and the man sometimes would have a brown bag, and if it was only 4 or 5 things, he would write the cost on the bag, and he'd tell you to add it up.
Oh,
then you'd have to stand, give you practice, and then he would re-add it and tell you how you were right or wrong. So he made a pleasure out of it, kind of a game. Mm-hmm. Well, down here, I remember they had a register that they would run up on the register.
They didn't have to use it.
But there was
You didn't get as much practice. You didn't need it.
No. There was a meat department, and Mr. Powers was in charge of the meat department. And being young and really not know, I knew a little because I had cooked at our house for my mother who had been ill. So I did shopping and I did cooking, but I certainly didn't know a lot of cuts of meat or anything like that. So I would add, Mr. Powers would tell you what you were going to have, what cut of meat you would need, how long to cook it. He was like the head chef almost, telling you how to use things. So you learned a lot from Mr. Powers. And then there was the young man, and I can't think of his name either, who managed the store, became really high up in the A&P in years to come. But he managed the other part of the store, which had all the groceries and vegetables that you would want, all, not in huge amounts like you see in the supermarket, but there was enough turnover so there were always trucks delivering there and supplying the store.
So do you think that most people who lived in town shopped at the A&P rather than...
Yes, a lot. At that point, a lot did, because a lot of people did not have a car. A lot of people then didn't have a car, so you really couldn't go too far else. Other than the little delis that were around, which did hold some household items that if you were stuck, you could get something.
So this would have been still when you were first married and had your children?
First married, yes, when they were 50s. Yes. Oh, yeah. This was in the 50s, the early year 50s and through the 50s. Yeah. And then whatever it was in the 60s, that store closed, and they built the big A&P.
Oh, it's still there.
Down there. That's still there.
Do you recall what was there? I know there was an estate or something.
Oh, the estate was there. The estate was there, and there was a caretaker's house that, I don't remember the family's name, but a family, there were a couple of boys that lived there, and they were sort of caretaking the estate and the property until they might have still been there a little while after the terraces were built. But then, when the property then they moved out, and the house was, and the brook came down through there. You'd see the brook come down.
The one that runs down through Reynolds.
Now it runs under the A&P, and it runs under the back of where the bank is, and then it crossed over under the road. And when we first moved here, for a good number of years, Ann must have been 2, 3. Some of the kids had gotten a little older. On the other side of the street where the youth center is, the old horseshoe place, the forge that was there, was still there. And the water from the brook that was the only place it went under, was under the road, because you could see it running down in back of the houses on Main Street. And then it went under, and it came over, and it spilled over a beautiful waterfall down into the crevice and eventually out down into the river. So the kids would always want to go there, cross the street right away, to be sure that you could watch the water and throw a stick or something, it might go over the water. Yeah, so it made it a very interesting walk for the children. And we walked, around all those areas all the time. Yeah.
And then at some point you went house hunting? Or
no, we lived there until 1954. So we were there like 3 or 4 years, 49, 52, about 3, almost into 4 years. And in the meantime, the Spite House, the story we heard, was built because somebody wanted to build something on that spot, and the neighbors wouldn't agree to let them do it. Now, whatever it was they were going to build, I don't know. The story was that there was all these nice houses around, and because they wouldn't let whoever this person was that owned that, whatever he was going to do, he built that house there for spite. To spite the neighbors, because they had such high ideas, I guess, or whatever it was. And across from us in those years, Lou Limekiller lived in the house on the other side of the aqueduct, opposite. And he was great in sports. The society would know about him. Yeah. So, anyway, we had the first floor apartment on the aqueduct, which was really, it was the coldest, because there was no heat underneath or anything, but it was beautiful. The sunshine, the openness, the aqueduct, the space for the children. A man by the name of Milano, who was married to a lady from Hastings, bought the house. One day we got a letter in the mail telling us that we had to get out because they wanted our apartment. And we were kind of stunned. I said, that's what you get for giving your 4 years of your life to this America. You're getting bounced out of this place. And
you're referring to your husband's service?
Yeah, to George's service in the Navy for all those years, and sinking of his ship and everything else. Oh my God. Well, he didn't look at it particularly that way. He was always still proud that he had a chance to serve his country. So we said, well, you know, where the heck are we going to go? There's nothing around here. Really nothing. And we had been trying to save some money all along from whatever the pay was. We always put something in the bank. And we didn't have a car, and we didn't have a lot of things because we were saving it for the time that we could buy something and buy it not having to pay extra interest or anything. So Grandpa Nehrbauer comes. Now he's the plumber. He comes down, and you know, the Depression and during the war, there were houses that had been abandoned and were still sitting empty. And you could have gotten a lot of them for a song, they used to say, if you had a song to sing. Well, a lot of us didn't have any songs to sing, but we saved some money, and now we had a little bit of money. And Grandpa reads this letter about a week or so after we get it. And he said, that letter had come in the springtime, the early springtime, that we had to get out. So we just had a few months, they said, that you had to get out of the house because the landlord who owns the house, he wants that apartment and he's entitled to it. So Grandpa says, well, you know, he says, Finley's old house up there on the hill, that's empty. The old man's dead and Bill Finley doesn't live there. And that house is sitting there empty. He only comes around there a couple of times a year. I'll get Bill Finley and see if he won't rent that house to you. So eventually he met Bill Finley, and the arrangement was made that we could rent this house. And we did rent it, and we moved in here up on 17 Hamilton on Halloween that year, 1954. And we brought not only our 3 children who were growing in that house, but our most recent child, 4-month-old, Matthew. So we moved in here with 4 children. And we were thankful to God that we had this wonderful roof over our head. And Ann had, when she would say her night prayers, she was the oldest one, and we would be praying that God would do something to help us maybe find a house to live in. And she would always say, what was she, like 4 or 5 years old? A house with an upstairs. She always liked this idea, house with an upstairs. She liked the idea of it. And this house had an upstairs. Yeah, and boy, were we ever thankful and grateful. Well, we lived here a couple of years paying rent, and then we found that there was a lien on the house that a lawyer had not paid off, though apparently had been given money to pay off, and that's another whole story. But anyway, the thing was, we had to buy this house right away and pay off that lien. So now we got a hold of Bill Finley and we told him what happened, and he agreed to sell us the house. And that's how we bought the house.
It became yours.
Yeah, it became our house and our mortgage. Yeah, and we felt very, very blessed. And we still didn't get a car. That was no car. So we were still walking up and down this wonderful hill here and saying, thank God we have a hill to walk up because we got a house.
And you were raising your children.
And I was raising the children. And George was working. He was commuting down to Wall Street, walking down to the train and walking up again, and working lots of overtime because we were still putting money aside, little bits as it was, and putting it in and getting some interest on it. And lots of overtime money would go into that, because we managed to live, within our means. We always had what we needed. Always had what we needed. We didn't have any huge dentist bills. We had little dentist bills. But there were no big jobs like getting braces on your teeth or thousands, which it would be now. But we managed. And Joe, the drugs that we had to get, Aljo's was our druggist. And he was down on the corner of Warburton Avenue in Maine, which is now the wine store, liquor store. And Joe Aljo was down there, and he had a soda fountain. That's where we bought our ice cream on a Sunday. And if you didn't have the money, Joe Aljo would run a book. and he would charge it, but so much money from the pay every week was accounted to go to pay that bill, so that we always kept it pretty well paid up. That was one of the first things you did. You paid the people that you owed some money to. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was the only book I think that we ever kept anywhere. And he never charged interest. No interest, just if you'll pay it when you can pay it.
We could rely on you.
That was Joe Aljo, a saintly man, I'll tell you. And with all the kids, we always had somebody,
had some ice cream to buy.
Somebody needed a sulfa drug or somebody needed something, but we managed to have ice cream. Yeah, oh yeah. And they didn't eat it every day anyway. They had it on a Sunday for a Sunday treat. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me a little about the neighbors you found next door when you moved in.
Well, now we moved into a gold mine of neighbors, the Cronells, who were the relatives of Puss Cronell, who was a policeman in Hastings for many years. Bill Cronell, it was his nephew, it would have been. Bill Cronell lived next door, and his wife, Lena, and Bill's two sisters, Agnes and Marie, and there was always some various relative who would come and be visiting for a few months, or a cousin or somebody would be here, so there was always a great group, and there was always a helping hand. Now, we had no car, so if there was an emergency, the Cronells always filled our emergency. No matter what it was, Cronells filled the emergency. And we never could have, I think, survived as well as we did without them, because they were so good neighbors.
And were they raising children?
They were yes, they had a few of them were, two of them were older than what my children were, a good bit, but then there were a couple that were around the age. Edward was a little older, but Nancy was Matthew's age, so they were kind of in the playpen together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they grew up, and then one of the sons had a couple of children, and he ended up living here for a number of years, raising his...
Just wait for that, I think.
My clock.
Yeah, we'll just pause for a second. Okay.
He ended up raising his children with the help of his mother, and those boys grew up here from a fairly early age.
Must have been a lively street.
It was very lively. Not only that, but... the Palazzos lived on the corner of Mount Hope and this dead end of Hamilton, and he was quite a noted artist, and had books and had his drawings in the books, and would speak at the library sometime. Mm-hmm. They didn't have children, and they loved the children.
What was his full name?
Anthony. Tony Palazzo. Yeah, and she was Nina. And her sister lived there with her for a long time, and her sister was very gifted with crocheting, and she taught a couple of my girls how to crochet and do a little sewing. And so they were very good neighbors all those years too. And he excelled in bird calls too, and had records, and taught my children lots of bird calls. On a weekend, they would go and he would play them and imitate them and so forth. And they were great. And across the street, directly, the Plowies lived. Mr. and Mrs. Plowey, and their two sons, Walter and Rudy. Walter graduated from West Point eventually, was married to somebody from Hastings, and Rudy married somebody, I don't think Rudy ever had children, but Walter, I think, did. And the Plowies lived here many times, and when they sold the house across the street has been sold, I think, 5 times in the 50, however many years, 60 we've been living here. So there are a number of different families that have lived there, a short while or a longer while. And on the corner, on my corner, would be the west corner, the southwest corner of our dead-end street. The Gallons lived. And the Gallons had lived down on School Street in Hastings when they had been first married with his mother. And then his mother moved up into this house with them, and it was a sort of a two-family house then.
So what was the mother's name?
Clarence, he was Clarence, and she was Etta. She always referred to Etta and Clarence. But his mother, I don't know what her name was. And they had, Clarence and Etta, they had two daughters, June and Audrey. And when we moved here, June, I guess June was, she worked for the telephone company. And she had, I guess she was out of college by then, St. Vincent's. And Audrey, I know, was out of college and had been working. But June was a beautiful seamstress, and she really taught my daughter Treese how to sew, because Treese still sews her clothes today. Mm-hmm. And the Gallons, interestingly enough, at one point in their early years, had lived in the same apartment on Lincoln Avenue, which was a three-family house, when George was young. So the Gallons knew the Nehrbauers, and there was another family that lived in that three-family house, and their name was another old Hastings family, McClave. Ginny McClave Gray, she married Gray, she was my age, Ginny, but her mother and father, they lived in that house, and my husband George grew up with Ginny when they were children. So it was a very homey kind of situation.
A lot of reacquaintances.
So you had to really behave because everybody knew who you were. Yes. So there was a reacquainting of all of that in later years as we got married and settled. The Gallons, the McClaves. Yeah, it was really a wonderful home feeling. Yeah. And when we moved up here from the Spite House, we didn't have an awful lot of furniture or belongings, but in order to save a few dollars of getting a big moving van, Beitchie Edwards, that's another old Hastings name, Beitchie Edwards lived in the three-family house as you go down on the left-hand side of Hamilton. There's a three-family house. Beitchie Edwards and his wife lived in that house. And Beitchie was a friend of Nick Nehrbauer and Henry Nehrbauer, and consequently George Nehrbauer. Beitchie owned a big old truck, and he did favors for people, just as kindly. When you got $5, you gave it to him. Well, Beitchie moved us from the Spite House up to this house on Hamilton Avenue. And one of my son Chris's greatest memories is he was allowed to sit up in the front with the driver in this big truck when we moved up here. So, and Beitchie, got $5. That was it. And Beitchie's wife they never had children. Later on, they adopted a lovely daughter who married somebody from Hastings. But Beitchie, the years he was living in the three-family house, had bought the corner property on Mount Hope and Hamilton, and was building his house by himself and with friends. And he finally built that house and moved into it. And that's where Pam was the daughter that they had. Wonderful, wonderful girl. And then in the meantime, the opposite corner, on Hamilton, right across from Beitchie's new house, Bernaducci's, she's still there.
What's her name?
Helen Bernaducci. Helen and the husband, they built that house new. She's the only person that's lived in that house. And they had two children. The boy played with my Treese, would be around the same age, 58 or so, Bobby Bernaducci, who they grew up and got married and moved away. So, there's a lot of known people around the area. Yeah.
Now, when you moved here, I take it Hillside School wouldn't have been there yet.
No, they were.
So the woods were continuous.
It was pretty close by. They were. Yeah, the woods were still pretty continuous when our kids were still little.
Did they make much use of it going into the woods?
Oh, yes. Oh, the children did. Oh, they thought that was their... See, now, presently, there is, well, for the past 35, 40 years, there is we're not the last house on the street. There's another house in back of us, and then you go into the woods. That property, in those years, in the late 50s, I guess it was, or so, very late 50s, a woman knocked on our door and said her mother owned the house, the property next door. There was one big lot, and there was an access of 12 feet down to Valley Place that went with the property. And her mother thought years ago she was going to build on it, but never did, and the mother wasn't well, and sent her daughter up to offer the house to whoever lived in this house where I am.
Offer the property?
Offered that property, and they asked $2,000 for it. We did not have $2,000 to buy a house. We had a number of children. Thank
Would
God.
you have had all your children by then?
No. No, we didn't. But we had bills to pay, and we knew that if we even borrowed something, we'd have the borrowing to pay back and the taxes on the property, and we wouldn't have had enough money from what he was earning, even in overtime, to do all that. And so we had to tell the lady we were so sorry, because the children thought that was their whole yard. They played over there all the time. And they had a big swing that had to go, a big tire swing that was off one of the big trees in the woods, and all the kids in this neighborhood played on it. And so eventually that house, the property was sold for about $5,000 to a builder from Yonkers, and he built that house in the 60s. Yeah. Now the children would be on this street in those years, and we didn't have formal programs much then. Somebody might have had music lessons or something, but there was no play dates or anything like that. You went out and knocked on the door of your friend, you said, do you want to do this today or let's do that? And you worked it out among yourselves. Down on Wilson Place, there were the McHugh kids, and I think there were 5 of them at least. They played up on this street because it was a dead end and it was flat. And they played ball and they played ring alivio. They played all the games up here. It was Play Street. And up the top of Mount Hope, on the left-hand side as you go around the corner, there were the Nethercotts. And Nethercotts had 4 boys. So they would come down through the backyards and they played on the street. Goodness. I have pictures when they were kids. They had parades on the street. They had everything. Every wagons. They rode their bikes when they were younger, back and forth. It was always safe for them. And, it was always, I was home. Phyllis Nethercott was home. Mrs. McHugh was home. The mothers were basically not out working, a few here and there. And the interesting thing was, even when I was growing up, how times changed. In school, sometimes there'd be a child whose mother died. And that child got so much sympathy from everybody in the class and extra treatment because she had no mother. Her mother wasn't there when she went home. There was somebody else there. Sometimes it was her aunt, and sometimes it was her aunt on her mother's side. And we all felt so sorry for her. And now children, the mothers are working. And many of them go to play hour or something before the mother comes home. And I can remember my kids would come home, not that they were big conversationalists, they would walk in the door and they'd say, Ma, I'd say, yeah, I'm here, I'm in the back or something, and that's it. The next thing I'd hear from them was, I'm going down to Wilson Place. Oh, okay. Be back by dinner, or be back at 6, or you can't go yet, you have to do something before you go. But that check-in at that front door was always, Ma?
So you see changes have occurred then in the way kids
and
their leisure time
is very different. They mostly kind of thought of things themselves, good or bad. But you were here kind of checking on them all the time. But I don't know if it's better or worse. I don't judge anything. Everybody has a different situation, and you don't know what pressures are on them or what they're like, so you don't judge. I just always hope the best for the children. Yeah. Yeah. That's the way it is. But that was good. If the kids and if all the kids were on the street, you mixed up Kool-Aid. You know, it wasn't too sugary then. And you come out in the summertime, you'd have, or else down the backyard when we had a pool table, you know, knock hockey and stuff. And then in the playgrounds too, when the children were all young, the playground at Reynolds Field, they did have, it was limited, but they had the showers went on every day. And they had different contests during the summer. And they had that wonderful high slide that I got nervous frustration over every time they climbed up and went sliding down.
This is down where the current playground is?
Yes, yeah. There wasn't anything protective there then, believe me. It was, you're at your own risk. But surprisingly, the only thing terrible that happened, and the older sister would sometimes be a little bit in charge, or the older brother if they were going in a group, and they went usually in a group. 4 or 5 kids from around would go down together. Was Matthew, who was always a little more of a challenge, decided he was going to get there before everybody else at the playground. He ran ahead and tried to climb over that metal fence that had the sharp prongs, and he got caught on it.
Oops.
And he ripped his arm open. Oh yeah, there were other kids up the hill that used to come. Eddie and Barbara Rich. They lived up the top of Mount Hope. And they were there for many, many years too. And they would all join. Some, not all the time, but lots of times. They would join in and play with the kids. Until they got older, into maybe the 8th grade or 7th. And then they hooked up with maybe other kids different times, as mine did also. But in the younger years, they gathered here. And then, of course, in those years, they built the pool, the swimming pool, while we were here. And boy, that was a dump over there for a lot of the early years.
Literally a dump?
Literally a dump that contractors would dump stuff there. People wanted to get rid of old clothes or anything, they dumped them over there.
So it was a clearing, not part of the woods?
It was, there was a pit over there. Mm-hmm. It was kind of the natural contour almost of the land as you came. Yeah, as it is now. Although it wasn't quite that deep then. Mm-hmm. But land, contractors dumped in it, and the village dumped in it, and different things. People would come up and dump old tires and dump.
So did the kids have fun exploring?
Oh, did they ever? But there were rats over there too, so the rats kept them a little bit at bay. Some of them didn't care about the rats. They'd go with a stick, prod. So the dump was over there, and then we saw the dump disappear eventually. You know, it was all dug out, and the swimming pool get built in. So now let's see. Matthew was born in 1954. So by 1962, around that time, that pool must have been built, because Matthew was about 7 or 8. And he kept saying, "I'm going to be the first kid in the pool. I'm going to." And they had gone to swimming lessons to learn to swim. The older sister took them to Tibbetts in Yonkers. They couldn't go to Tarrytown then. The younger kids went to Tarrytown to learn to swim. So he was dying. He knew how to swim, and he dearly loved swimming and diving from the time he was little. Loved that water. So he was going to be the first kid in the pool, he swore every time. He was watching this pool, waiting for it to open. So, all right, now the pool is open. Well, there's a boy by the name of John Fisher, whose father had something to do with the building of the pool. John was scheduled to be the first kid in the pool, which Matthew didn't know, but Matthew was there when it was still dark out, I think, waiting to be the first one, except John Fisher was there.
Did they charge per... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So, they had to have their permits. Oh, yeah, you got your permit, and I still have a lot of those tags.
So similar to what it is now.
Yeah, similar to now, yeah. They had a little plastic tab.
Do you have any memory of what it
cost? No picture on it, just the number. No, I don't. It was not expensive. It wasn't expensive.
So sorry, we left
it was something that they all had a permit to get in that pool. And
so Matthew was still hoping to be the first?
Yes, well, he was like right behind, one step in back of John Fisher, when John Fisher was the first kid that was admitted to the pool.
Probably never forgave him.
No, he was friends with him.
Yeah, I know.
So, and that was a great boon to have that pool. And that changed the whole atmosphere of what that little lower playground at Reynolds Field had been. That the picture changed then because so much was centered up here, though some things were somewhat centered there. So there was no need to have an afternoon shower, though I think they kept it for a while. And because they had the pool was up here, and they had swimming lessons for the kids, and they had to be a lifeguard for a while. They trained them. Yeah, so that was very good. That was good, and it really kept the youngsters as something else they could do.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a real asset to that pool.
Yeah. But I tell you, most of the kids then, they didn't look for somebody to tell them what to do. They kind of used their own, they would go on long hikes sometimes on their bikes.
On the aqueduct?
Without a helmet.
Yeah.
Oh, they would go way up the line. They'd go up to Elmsford, or they'd go along what are bike trails now. There were some old rough roads. Sprain Road was old, went a long distance into Yonkers. And there were places they could actually go that were still pretty wooded. And many times they would go up to Children's Village, up to that area, through the woods, walking, not on bikes, walking.
Did they make use of Sugar Pond skating? Did people ever swim in Sugar Pond?
They now, you call Sugar Pond this up here, up in Hillside. We never called that Sugar Pond. We called that the Duck Pond. Because, and it was fed, now this would be interesting, it was fed through a series coming from up toward Dobbs, and there was an area in George's childhood and teen, when he was a teen and child. They were great ice skaters. They ice skated a lot. And when you walk further up into the Children's Village property, up the hill, there's a spot they call the Indian spot. There's a flat landing where there used to be a little building there, which was burned down, is gone. But there was a regular fireplace. And even I went there when I knew George. We had picnics there, and we cleaned up everything when we left at night. But when you go beyond that, and then down a hill toward the area where Judson Avenue comes in from Dobbs Ferry, but a little more to the east, there was a whole area called Three Islands. Now it's just about totally overgrown, and you wouldn't know it. But the water ran through there with three little islands in between, and it's all overgrown to the north part of it now, with rushes and reeds, but there were wonderful pussy willows up there then too. And it was clear and big enough so that you ice skated around these three islands. The water encircled them. And he ice skated there a lot. And for the other water, when you go through the woods and you go back out toward, as you would be headed more like along Edgewood, but you're deeper in, they call it, there's a vernal pond there. That vernal pond actually had been a really natural swimming hole that the kids from Children's Village would come down to on a regular basis and swim in.
Sorry, more on the southern end of Hillside Woods? East of the school? There's one that's called Vernal Pool. There's some kind of a wall back in there?
Yeah, that's it. Because there's a pathway there you can walk directly out to Edgewood Avenue.
Yes.
That's the one. Yes. Now that was actually in George's and Stanley. They did camping overnight there. Stanley Rosenkamp was great for the outdoors camping. And of course George was his friend and went along with him. And they would go camping just overnight, take their tents and eat and everything, and swim over in that pond, which is, you wouldn't know it now.
Yeah.
But I remember it still when it was those early years when it was still pretty much of a pond.
Do you remember the woods as being different than they are now in terms of what grows there?
Much fuller. Do you know that when I was first up here living near these woods, now that was in the 50s, I found a lady slipper. I didn't pick it. I watched it. And it was over toward where the road to the pool is now, way up in there. And I watched for it like in the springtime, late spring, to come up. And one year it didn't come up. Because that road was getting wider. More people were up there. People dumped leaves and different things on them, and it disappeared.
Aww.
It disappeared. And whatever the purple flower is in springtime, also, my kitchen window, every spring there was a field of purple over there. That's gone.
Yeah, I don't know what that would be.
Much of, so many of the little flowers, they're all gone. All gone. And it's a pity. Even the pathway, I can't believe, it was a solid dirt path that we walked going up beyond Hillside School, way up in that way, where they're starting to throw a little gravel down. It was an absolutely solid dirt path. And the trees on either side, you couldn't see the top of the hill at all in the summer. It was so thick with trees. And you can look and see. They have either died and fallen over, or the deer have eaten anything growing up in their place.
The young growth is gone. Yeah.
It's all gone. And because it's all gone, when it rains, the rain is washing the path. You go on that path now, oh, it's hard to walk. There's stones. You have to watch your step over roots of trees. It's a pity.
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
Yeah, it's changed. Someday I imagine, because of thank God the property is dedicated, not that you can't undedicate something, but it is dedicated legally, all of our hillside woods, that someone, when times are better and there's some dollars around, that they will start replanting. This is when the deer problem is solved, if everything isn't gone by then, to start replanting. Because you go through that woods now, and so much of it, it's just rotted, and we've had blights. Ash, those trees have fallen over and died. And because of that, and the deer, the rains come. I mean, you'll notice we've tried along our pathway to put some old logs where a tree fell over to build it up a little, so when the wash comes, it'll stop it a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I know in the past there's been a lot of wood out in front of your house, cut wood.
Oh, yes. Well, that was exercise wood mainly because we don't have a fireplace. But for years, my husband, for exercise, my son-in-law from Larchmont was a fireman. Was a paid fireman over there. And oftentimes, area neighborhoods, they would take trees down, they would leave them there for somebody to take. My son-in-law would take them and he would bring them over here, and my husband would cut them up, and then he'd come and get them and burn them in my son-in-law's fireplace. So for years he did that. And then occasionally, around here, many's the time I went with the car, with the trunk open. If down on the dirt road there was a tree that they cut up and they're left there to people to take. And he would have his heart's delight here, cutting that wood and splitting it for my son and my daughter, both of whom had houses with fireplaces.
Where they could actually use it as fireplace.
And they used it. And he got the exercise out of it.
He stayed fit.
He got the exercise out of it.
And then didn't he also get involved to some degree in maintaining some of the paths?
Oh, yes, he did. Just out on his own.
Yeah.
On his own, he always did.
Not a formal relationship.
Not formal, but he would do a little trimming and he would build up the pathway. And so that it wouldn't wash away further, or if there was a vine on a tree choking it, he would get his stuff and he would clip it down so it would continue to grow. Yeah, he dearly loved Hastings. He really did. Yeah, it was home.
And I understand that there used to be a median that ran all the way up Mount Hope.
Oh, yes, that's true. The center island median ran all the way up from the very bottom, came around the corner, went up the top, up Mount Hope, round by Nethercott's. A little bit of it is left when you go past Lincoln. Mm-hmm. But they had removed a lot of it on the lower part of Mount Hope.
Do you know what the reasoning was behind that?
Oh, they were going to move traffic better, they thought.
I see. Okay.
They did leave the roundabout island, which was a high round mound, and Mr. Warner, who lived here in Hastings for a lot more years than me even, although died while we were here, he would keep flowers growing on that mound, that circular mound, and cars would come down and go around that, and then it was the strip, but the strips are gone. And there was a big strip going right up Mount Hope Boulevard, around the corner, past Nethercott's, and all the way down, all the way over.
Jefferson? You're talking up by Jefferson?
Yeah, yeah. It followed Mount Hope all the way to the other end over by the Parkway. And they were removing some of it, but we thought they were kind of done removing when they had done this strip here, because there was still the existing strip up on the top of Mount Hope, after you went round the corner, all the way over to Cochrane and then on down. So one day, in those years, when Phyllis Nethercott's children were young, ours were young, the village trucks arrived with their equipment, and they were going to take the trees down. And they were younger maples then, beautiful trees. And Phyllis Nethercott, who was home, came out and said, "What are they doing?" "Oh," she said, "you can't do that. You don't have permission. We didn't hear anything about this, you know. There has to be, well, we're taking them down, Mayor. We're told to take them down." "Well, I'm calling them up right now. You can't do that." And she called me up. "Here, come up with the children." She went out. She called the mayor first. Then she went out and we put our chairs all along the strip, the mound, and we sat down. And we said, "We're just not going to move. So you can't cut those trees down because you might hurt us when they fall." And anyway, we already called the mayor, and he's coming up. So up he came.
Do you recall who the mayor was at that time?
No. And the job was canceled. That was it.
And the medians are still there.
And the medians are still there, and we never heard another word about it. And the next median is there. Now, when you get down by Lincoln Avenue, what is that? 4:30? I can't see it.
5:30.
Oh, 5:30.
Maybe we should stop.
No,
for a
we'll
bit.
stop. Yeah. No.
Well, you could, finish that story, and then we can...
Yeah, all right. The story is that when you got by Lincoln, that median ran a little bit to the left, and the road on the side started not being used. Just the one road was used, which was closer to the high end of Lincoln, because the children started playing and had a play field right where there are houses now. But they played, all the young children played baseball and whatever on that, rode their bikes on it and so forth. Until, I don't know what happened, whether that's private property now, if someone bought it.
So where it narrows again, and then, but there's that...
Yeah, it narrows and you just use one part. Then there's a mound, and then there's that property.
But the kids used to play in there.
So, yeah. And I don't know what the story on that is, that property. And of course, then that brings you down the hill to the nice walking path that ends up way over by Fairmont Avenue. Do you ever walk on that one?
No, I haven't.
Interesting. A little hard to walk on, but you can get there.
But you still go there once in a while.
Oh, it's 5:30.
Yeah, so we'll stop for now. Thank you so much.
I think I've told you just about everything anyway. What else do I remember?
Well, think about it a little bit. There may be a few more pieces to add, but we'll stop for today. Thank you.